Hi, everyone. Thanks for everyone who's joining. Really looking forward to today's session. We'll just give it a few minutes to get started, but really, really excited about being in the session today. We're going to be discussing planning model data needs. So we'll be talking through that, and I'm really excited to be joined by Omar today, and he's going to be the person who's going to be walking us through a process today. He's developed a really cool process for planning model data needs, and we're going to go through that, and then I'll go into building the equivalent of that on Morta and going through database concepts as I'm doing so. So we'll give it a minute or so, and then we'll get started. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, Omar, today.
Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's an honor for me to be here and participate in this crash course. I am excited to share my approach of how I do with the BIM data management. And also, I think it will be a good opportunity for Tunisian and African BIM community to learn more about Morta. So I will introduce myself. I am Omar Yaiche. I'm an architect and a BIM manager, CEO of EvoBIM, specializing in BIM integration and digital twin modeling. So today I will present a parameter matrix that I developed, and I have to share the credit with Mr. Anis Chakroun, who is the head of the technical department of one of my clients, who helped me explore and develop this matrix.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, Omar. I'm really excited for the session. I think there are a few things that are interesting. So first, one of the reasons why we joined BIM Heroes as a whole is it's an international community. And I think this is a great example of that. Like we met through the community, and you're the first person that I've actually spoken to with a Morta hat on from Tunisia. So it's a whole new region for us, and really excited to be having you as the challenge partner for this. And the second thing is, we'll be walking through that in a second, but the process that Omar developed for planning out parameters and model data needs, I think, is one of the coolest and most sophisticated processes that I've seen personally. So I definitely won't be able to replicate all of it in the session today, and I think the thing that's interesting about this is both this session and the last session where we had Ralph on have really well developed Excel workbooks. Like, I think they have Omar has definitely taken Excel to the limits and what he's doing. So I think that's one of the reasons why I thought he'd be a really, really exciting partner for this challenge specifically. So thank you so much for joining us, Omar. I think what I'll do is I'm going to give a quick overview of what we do as a company and the goals for the session today. I'm then going to hand over to Omar, who will be walking us through the process and what that looks like and how he manages it today. And then I'm going to be trying to build and replicate to an extent possible the process that Omar outlines while explaining concepts that relate to databases and how I'd be thinking about doing all of that. So thank you everyone for joining us. Today, and thanks to Emma and the BIM Heroes community, more broadly speaking, for organizing this event. If you don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders of Morta. I've spent the last few years working with, I started my career out in the Middle East working with one of the largest contractors there, realized we spend a lot of our time in spreadsheets and documents. So made the jump to co-found Morta around 6 years ago now. Really, our goal as sorry, 1 second. Just some context. Last time we did a session on automating tracking against information deliverables and the planning of information deliverables. today, really what we're going to be focusing on is information requirements and model data planning. Really our goal is going to be covering what the process looks like. We're going to be going through database design fundamentals, and we're going to look at how to build a dynamic information requirements database. The goal ends up being streamlining information requirements planning as we see it today. Now, just to contextualize what we do as a company, really the goal is to drive performance by automatically tracking with data hubs and with connected information. The way we see it is the industry currently has a range of challenges that we talk about. Things like productivity, building safety, here in the UK is a very big topic, handover, carbon, resource use, and trust and accountability, like people knowing that things are getting done as they should be. But in many ways, we view a lot of these as symptoms to a deeper challenge. And the way we see it is the core challenge in the industry today all revolves around poor information planning and tracking, which hampers visibility and performance. So it's interesting. We've had over the years solutions developed like the common data environments, like the BIM software for model authoring, like ERPs and field systems and P6 and BIM coordination systems. And each of them ends up being a silo on their own. And then we typically have Excel-based processes and Word documents where we plan out our needs and we do a lot of the tracking against these point solutions and the various data sources. The tracking ends up being highly manual, and when organizations want to create dashboards, for example, it ends up relying on a manual process of gathering a lot of this data. And fundamentally, that ultimately means that it's difficult for people to have an understanding of where things are at. So as a design manager, it's difficult to understand my design progress very quickly. It's difficult for a BIM manager to have a view of how complete and fit for purpose their data, the data is. It's difficult for a commercial manager to understand whether the project is within budget. And the same goes for QA, QC, and for sustainability management. It's just difficult to get answers to questions. Now, in many ways, the way we view it, and I think a lot of what the BIM Heroes community is after as a whole, is moving to worlds where information is connected. And I think all of us here believe that it can change the way that we deliver projects and assets for the better if we do so. So in many ways, my interpretation of what's happening is we have various outcomes and processes that we want to control and plan within construction projects and within design. So we have things like requirements, cost, carbon, and time. We have the scope of work, whether it's design, construction, or operation, and resources required to deliver said scope of work, like supply chain, workforce, material, and assets. And then we have interface areas like information management, risk management, and change management. Ultimately, these things that we're planning and tracking for should read data from consistent sources of truth. And those could be the document management systems, it could be the common data environments or BIM coordination platforms, it could be things like Revit itself, and so on and so forth. And then we should be able to derive insight from this data in various ways, whether it's with the likes of Power BI or BIM models or GIS or AI-based chatbots, for example. And we think if we all go there, what happens is we reduce risk within projects because we have a deeper understanding of how the project is performing. We save at least a day a week in admin from administrative tasks. We support in creating consistency and standardization across projects. And then that helps in getting more visibility and insight on performance. And one of the things that's emerging as well is being Industry 4.0 ready. More and more companies are thinking about, and people are thinking about how they leverage a combination of the human workflow and augment that with machines. So AI obviously becomes a big part of that. And then there are like various other emerging technologies. So ultimately, we think this is where the industry should go, and we believe that if the industry were to go there, then we'd have a vast range of benefits that would be unlocked for the industry and for you as individuals and as companies. Now, there are various ways of getting there, but really we aim to be the best way to achieve that vision that I described as a company. And to do that, what we do is we provide flexible hubs, web-based hubs, that connect information within architecture, engineering, and construction, and the built environment more broadly. In many ways, we have tables and we have documents, just like you would have on Excel and Word, but it's all built on a true database. And that ultimately means that the system is highly configurable, so you can build on it a range of processes over time. We have integrations with a range of software applications like ACC or Procore or Aconex or Viewpoint and Asite and BIM coordination platforms like Revisto and so on and so forth. And it's collaborative. So we allow multiple supply chain members to come in, see data that's relevant to them, feed in the data that's relevant to them, and work with that. And that's both from a permissioning level as well as from a pricing perspective. We're working with organizations across the built environment. The most important thing for me here is two things. The first is we work with every one of these profiles, which means we have an understanding of the different needs and how the different needs the different personas have, which then lends to a better product. But the second thing is everyone who we work with is focused on the built environment, because when we think of competition, we're thinking of things like Monday.com, Airtable, Smartsheets, Coda, Notion, and these types of solutions. And they work with every sector, whereas we're purely dedicated to the built environment and the construction sector. Now, most companies typically start with tracking files and information deliverables. That was the subject of last session. How do we create a master information delivery plan or a digital plan of work? And then how do we track that against what's in the CDE? But that's where many companies start. But today, obviously, we're going to be covering, I would say, a portion of this, which is the reference data and requirements elements. So how do we bring these together and how do we streamline that process? And then with more focus on tracking against data needs. Now, the goals for today's crash course are going to be first outlining and understanding a process for how model data gets planned within a project, taking into account various elements from how you bring together IFC and Revit, which I think is one of the unique things I saw that Omar has developed, as well as even accounting for different languages and the translation of all of that. So I think there are some really unique elements to what Omar is going to showcase today. And then I'm going to be looking at highlighting and introducing key database principles and how we'd re-engineer that Excel-based process into a process on a system like Morta. So really looking forward to that in a bit. But for now, I'd like to introduce Omar, who's going to be walking us through the process. Thank you so much, Omar, for joining.
As I said, it's my pleasure to be part of this program, and I will try to explain what we do with data management in an easy way. So I'll share my screen in 1 second. So before starting speaking about the matrix, I will put the context how we created this matrix and why. So usually in large-scale projects involving different parties from different countries. I will say the data within Revit are started to become a little bit chaotic, and partially this is due to the first overuse of shared parameters. Everyone is creating parameters for everything, even they are already existing within Revit. They are built-in parameters. The use of different versions of Revit, I'm talking about the language of Revit, not the year of Revit, can be sometimes problematic. Implementing or loading a lot of family from different source database, each one having their own data entry, how they write the name of the parameters, sometimes can be really problematic. And even sometimes the same information written in a different way. For let's say, for example, all the parameter name are in capital letter, or the first letter of the parameter is in capital letter, or everything is in lowercase. Could be problematic to sort and to export the element from Revit to IFC or other type of interoperability tools. And I think from a point of view of an owner who need all the information from the planning to design, going through construction, and finally planning and operating of building monitoring system to his project, having control of this information is really essential. So to address this, we developed this parameter matrix, which I will present now, which is kind of an exchange of information requirement with a centralized system of management for the project. So the first thing we did is to go through all the category of Revit and try to extract all the built-in parameters within Revit. So we went from each category to each category, extract all the built-in parameter, what sometimes is referred to the system parameters, and try to organize them by function. So we went from labeling them, like what I call here identification, to the classification, going to the, for example, for the MEP, what type of system classification they need, the information we can extract. Then the localization, the function, it is interior or exterior. It depends on the category and the families. Then the level construct, where this family is implemented, the offsets from this constraint, and we go so on from the elevation. We separate between the elevation from one level to the elevation from the base point project. Then we go to the geometry. We figured out there is a common geometry, common parameter for the geometry per category, and there is specified geometry for each categories. And we went through all the categories, as I said, extracting this information, sorting them, and taking the relevant parameter we need, because within Revit there is a lot of parameter we don't need from a point of view of an owner or a point of view of designer. It depends. And then after organizing them, we move it to implement the shared parameters. And doing so, we implemented only the necessary parameters, shared parameters we need. We didn't find already within Revit. And once we implement the shared parameters, we label it as a shared parameters. We implement the guide of this parameter, defining also if it is a type parameter or an instance parameter. It will help to share this information. What is the unit of these parameters? If it's a Boolean, it's a yes or no, it's a text, it's a degree. What is the unit in sometimes millimeters, square meters, and we go on for each element when we need a ratio, when we need the square meters, even for the MEPs, how they must be, sometimes it's an alphanumerical code or any type of unit. And even what is the IFC data of this the parameter. Doing so, we went through all the category of Revit, but we identified a limitation in Revit category system. Let me explain. In Revit, for example, a wall is including architecture and structural wall, but usually they are not the same because a wall in architecture can be a support of finishes or wall finishes, and both are exported to different type of AEFC. One is going for AEFC wall, the other one is going for AEFC covering. And the second part, for example, for the structural wall, which is the load-bearing wall, will require other information like framing and other exported data. It goes also with stairs. In architecture stairs, we have, which is basically the finishes of the stairs. In the structural stairs, it is actually the structure element of the stairs, but they are using both the same element in Revit and they are stored on the same category. It goes deeper in the MEPs because, for example, for mechanical equipment, it gathers all the type of mechanical equipment, and we know they are not the same. You cannot handle information from a air handling unit at the same level like a pump or a valve or any other component from the MEPs. So what we did, we created customized categories, as you see here in the head of the column, where we split it the Revit categories by function and by discipline and sub-discipline. So you can see here we have wall partition. We can find also structural wall. We will find architectural stairs and structural stairs. For the MEP, we went with another kind of thinking. It's basically we splitted all the elements by function, starting from the unit of production, going through the accessory for monitoring and controlling elements, to the terminal, which is sometimes a diffuser, a grill, or for electrical component will be lighting or other devices. And we extracted what we call here the distribution element, which is the duct and the fitting duct, the pipe and the fitting pipe, the wire, even if they are not elements, but they are part of the Revit. And later we have the carrier, which is the cable tray, the conduct, and their fitting. And we have a part which is labeled XX here, which is for room, space, and general information from the building, the sheets, and the views within Revit. Once we do these categories, we start processing all the information we have here and selecting where I need this information to be part of the project. And doing so, it will help us to ensure that all the information we want, even they are built-in parameter or shared parameter, are taken in account from each discipline and each element, wherever the category of Revit they are created on. So after doing all this process and assigning each parameter for each category, but what we try to do later is to leverage this matrix to be, I would say that, an automate EFC property set export. And to do so, we try to normalize the Revit data for EFC. What it means. Basically, when we see in Revit, for example, for the same information, it's written in a different way for each category or each element. Let me give you an example. For example, for the base level, which is the information where the element is implemented within our model. For some elements, when we click on the element of Revit, we're going to find this information shared in level parameters. For others, it will be base constraint, base level, schedule level, reference level, and it will go for most of the element. We're going to find different type of name for each element, but they're all referring for the same thing. So what we try to normalize things, I said all this information, I wanted to see them in my IFC as base level because they're giving me the same information. And even for the offset, there's a lot of different value. All of them are, I would say, mapped to the one name is offset. And also we try to reuse this matrix to create automatically our property set. So the group I organized before to by function for my parameters when I implement them, they will be the head of the property set. And on the same way, in the other column, I can say if this property set will be implemented for the hierarchy of the IFC for all the element type. When it is specific for one or two categories, at the time I will specify this one is for IFC door or IFC door type, window or window type, and it go on for all these parameters when I go deeper and deeper in the information I needed. And for my matrix here, I think I have more than 450 parameters. Once I do everything, I move to the next tab, and using macro in Excel, I can export my UTF-8 TXT file for mapping all the property set from Revit to export them in IFC. What I do is only I click here, and when it's done, it's in French. It will generate the TXT file with all the parameters I have prepared as I wrote them in my matrix. And it's also generate a second file, which give me a timestamp when the last time I exported my files, and enable me to compare for each export what changed and why I changed it. And in the same, the same way, I explore the same thing for the shared parameters in Revit. So what all the section here, which serve as property set, I gather it as the heads or the groups where I will store my shared parameters. So this will give me an opportunity to request to check if everything is okay or not. Then I move to the Revit shared parameters, where I can go down to check if everything go well. If something is in red, so I will go back to my matrix because I didn't implement the right information, or the guide code isn't implemented, or I have the same guide code for two parameters. Once it's done, it's the same thing through macro. I will export. This time it's not an UTF-8 but UTF-16 TXT file, and with the same process, I will have one file which is overused because you have to maintain the same name for the TXT file, and one file with a timestamp to figure out where the last time I exported and to compare elements. So, and I have other tabs here. This one helped me to validate the parameters between IFC and Revit because they don't have the same codification. To simplify it, we will not write the unit of each element in TXT files for Revit and TXT file for export of IFC. I have also a cat mapping here. We'll serve later. I will show you how to see each of my customized categories refer to which category in Revit or in IFC. And as we spoke, and as Mohammed said, to deal with different language, because I have to create each file for each type of Revit, French version, English, etc. So here I have all the category for in Revit written in the proper language, and also all the parameters built in Revit in different language. So it will help me with VLOOKUPs or Recherche X in French to automatically change or to monitor the exchange of information from language to another language in demand. So everything we did here, it's okay, but the most important part of this is how to communicate this information for the other BIM manager, for the lead appointed parties, because to deal with that, with this matrix, it's not easy. And sometimes in BIM, creating a lot of things and don't be able to share it, it's kind of be problematic for the process. And so to do so, what we did, we created another file, which a read-only file through Power Query, which will provide an image of my matrix. They cannot change it to see what I am doing and extracted a lot of columns they don't need to see. And here they can manage to see what I cross for each category, but it's not enough. To validate this with my client and with everyone involved in the project, we create another tab which will regroup all the parameters required for each, line level of information needed through any phases per category. So for example, when I see here architecture wall partition, I will see what are the category of IFC I am talking about. I have IFC wall, IFC covering, and Revit. They are both in the same category, which is wall. And I will see here all the information needed. So if I move to, let's say, for example, I want to go to the escalators. I only refresh. It will take some time, a little bit longer. And what I see here, the information has changed. So I see here there is some specific information for geometry of escalators, some properties specific for escalators, and so on. Some common requirement that this escalator should be taken account for fire requirement or fire regulation. It is need building monitoring system, control system. Does it require IT data and etc. That will give me an overview per category of the information. But we want to go further, more, is to help people implement this information as in their Revit models or through the shared parameter txt file. So what we did with this tab is each time I select shared parameters and I refresh my Power Query request, it will sort and give me what are the categories that this information need to be implemented, and going through some tools like DiRoots from the parameter managers, or it need to be easy to implement this information. So each time I choose any parameters and I refresh, it will show me what are the category. For example, this one is footing number. I want to see the footing number for any isolating footing and the piles and the column beyond this footing. So I will integrate it to the structural column in Revit and the structural foundation, and later through IDS or through EFC viewer, I have to see those two, this parameter and the AFC column category for these two elements. For the other tabs, those are setting tabs and validate tabs that are taken Power Query from the previous version that I will update anytime I am using this process and sharing it with the appointed parties. So basically, I will say the benefit of this system, it will ensure a consistent and organized data from the project inception until taking all the life cycle of the building. It will give the control to the owner, so it empowers them to maintain data integrity, but it requires some challenges. First of all, the BIM maturity of the owner. It requires a high level of BIM maturity from the owner, and it requires a specific file for each language version of Revit to be able to export the elements. And also, it's not so difficult. It requires a desktop Excel license to be able to monitor macro functionalities. So I hope it was clear for everyone. That's our process to ensure data consistency through the life cycle of a project. So I'll give you back the.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Omar. I hope everyone can see why I said it's one of the most sophisticated processes I've seen for going about planning model data, generally speaking. So thanks a lot for sharing that.
But to summarize everything, but
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to ask was what drove you to really start looking at solving this as a problem to begin with?
Actually, it started because with one of the projects who took at least 2 or 3 years of design when we tried to sort element and we sort data. We find themselves in a chaotic thing, and each time you're looking for one parameter, I say the height of a door, it's written in different type and different manner from one family to another family, from one model to another model. And sometimes we get a French parameter, sometimes we get an English parameter, because in this project it was involved with England architecture from England, an architect from Tunisia, some structural part in France, some engineering, lot of engineering in Tunisia, so some part. So we start gathering a lot of information and try to sort this information became for us really difficult. So starting from this overview, we try to create something it's really centralized. And even now in our process, when we are implementing a new families, we pass them through what they call an airlock. So we open these families and try to map each information to the right information needed. So sometimes it's German escalator. So the parameter will be in German, but we will map it to the right needed parameters without disrupting all the structure of the family.
Yeah.
And so doing so, even when we are, especially during technical meetings, sometimes when you try to find the right information, it will take you several minutes to find the right information. And if you open Revit during a meeting, it will take you sometimes more time. So you need to always export to the IFC, because through IFC viewers, it's easier to sort and to go and to check each element. But we need to find this information in the, how we say that, in a structured manner way. And even I will share another thing from my screen. Even for implementing this information, when we created this parameter through, I don't know if you see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
So when we have an alphanumerical naming for the shared parameters, they will be sorted in a logical manner. So I will not try scrolling down to find where do I find these parameters. They will be sorted in a logical way. So I'm going from in my matrix from top to bottom, and this information will be replied with the level of information needed. So when I say, for example, I am in LOE 300, I will find this part already implemented. When I will reach an as-built model, all of this must be filled, and it will be filled from the top to bottom in a logical way. So we try to create something. We try to think how people will do to, how to say, better explain and in easy way to understand how to implement the information, to monitor them, even for the BIM managers, for the important parties. It will help them to do their checking for the models before uploading them. And if you are talking about EDS, we can create our own EDS each time you upload your model. If those information within my parameter matrix are not filled, so the model is rejected or accepted with some adjustment.
Amazing. Can I show you something? I was speaking to a friend a few days ago, and I was telling him about what this challenge concept, like someone walks through a process and then I'm going to outline what that looks like on a system. But he was like, do you try to mock up the workflow while the person is speaking? So what I tried to do while you were going through the process, this may be simplifying it a bit, but fundamentally what you're trying to do is, or what you're doing is, you have exchange information requirements, That's probably somewhere on Word. You then have an Excel file for model data planning, and like the which has like all of the parameters and so on and so forth. You're mapping that to things like IFC and Revit, and then you're mapping it to their schemas, and then you're also mapping it to translations in different languages. And that feeds into this Excel file, which then you can use macros to do things like create IFC property sets, Revit shared parameters, and potentially things like IDS.
Exactly, yeah.
Amazing. And then the next bit is you need to share it with the supply chain, of course, and make sure that they have that, because ultimately what all of this is about is them being able to produce this data.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I think the one thing now, what you just did is then there is Revit, collect Revit data, or Revit basically itself. And then that data needs to be, I need to do in some ways, I mean, this could also be IDS in the future, but, and then I need to compare this against this. I need to compare what's in Revit against what against what I set as the plan.
One thing, other thing we took in account, we tried to create a model which can be customized by everyone. Whenever we are using Building Smart database, or we are using working in
100%.
Middle East or working in Europe, you can be able to customize it through the requirements of the country, of the requirement of the client. That's our main goal too.
100%. Yeah, that's what the way you set it up. You could, someone comes with a new mapping, you can just add the new mapping. You want to have different classifications, you can have different classifications, which is what's really cool about it. Okay.
We are using built-in parameters of Revit for most of the parts, so it will be only to map the information of built-in parameters of Revit to the right IFC map, or right IFC parameter or naming, and it will go on. It can be done for Copy or any other type.
Yeah, amazing. But regardless of, I think that the interesting thing is obviously we went through things like translations, but even if people aren't on a project that has multiple languages, increasingly they have first to plan what data do they want. They potentially have to map that against Revit, and then many projects there's a push towards IFC, so they need to be able to do that and then do these exports. Like I would say, even if they don't have the translation issue, a lot of the process is largely like what needs to be happening as well. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope people have taken inspiration from the process, because I really think it's one of the most detailed processes and systematic ways of identifying data requirements. And I love it when someone has built a lot of macros, or partnered with someone to build a lot of macros, because it just shows how much how important you think it is to actually systemize this process. So thanks a lot for sharing that with us.
That's my pleasure.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking everyone through how I would build that on something like Morta. And I'm going to be explaining principles as I go in relation to databases, and how I'd rethink some of these things when I'm doing this. Omar will be with me, and if he has any comments throughout, he'll be commenting, and we'll just take it from there. Like, the idea is we're trying to keep these sessions as authentic as possible. So in many ways, what happens if I'm working through the client, working through with a client, you'll almost always have an Excel file, and then people will be like, what can that look like on Morta, and how would you go about doing that, and can it be done or can it not be done? So the point of these sessions is in many ways someone is sharing a process, and usually the partner will have what we see as a very well developed version of that process, as Omar just did. And then I'll respond with, this is what that looks like and how I'd go about doing it on the platform. But here I'll do a lot more of highlighting some of the key concepts behind all of this. So really, to recap, the idea is going to be to create exchange information requirements. From these, we're going to have model data plans that will be in a table of sorts. We need to map it against various types of data sources. And we need to eventually be able to export a range of things from it. That's what we'll mainly cover today. We'll mainly cover model data planning. We'll try for next time to focus it on assuring and checking it against Revit. But today I think the process that Omar outlined is very rich. So I just want to do that justice, and then we can have another session focused on assurance. Now, really, as we're doing that, what we'll be covering are these concepts: tables, data types, data validations. So one of the key things about databases is these are structured data sets, and there's always a table that has a set of records, which is the value, which is like the information that we're looking at. That's typically what we do in spreadsheets. Then we have data types. So every column can have a specific data type. It can be a select list. It can be a select list. It can be an attachment, a date, an email, and so on and so forth. There's this concept of data validations. What do I need to have that's live versus that has some rules to it? So shouldn't have blank values, for example, should have a unique value, and so on and so forth. There's this concept of relationships, and we'll be touching on that in a few ways, because all of these mappings and these translations that we were talking about earlier will need to have relationships. Views is going to be especially important for relaying this information to the supply chain and people being able to see the data that's relevant to them. And I don't think I'll be going into, actually, I will touch on APIs today because of webhooks, and we'll go through that in a bit. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this on the platform. So the platform is web-based. If you want to try this out yourself, feel free to try it out. You can go to morta.io and you can get started and sign up. If you want to try things out, just feel free to reach out to me. If you've hit a free trial limit, just reach out to me, and we'll let you to try it out. Now, effectively, what happens is I can come in and I can create a new hub. I'm just going to call it model data planning. You can see when I do that, I have the ability to create from templates. So you can see we have some templates here related to information delivery planning. That's last time what we started with. We have building regulations compliance. That's becoming really relevant here in the UK for the Building Safety Act. We have things around handover and asset information. And then we have an ISO 19650 compliance suite focused on information management. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click use this template. And obviously, a lot of what we're going to be going through today is, I would say, concepts that run across any no-code platform you would see. So if you look at things like Airtable, a lot of the concepts that we'll be going through will apply. If you look at systems like Notion, Confluence, Smartsheets, then Extent, Monday.com, they're all examples of solutions that you can take and you can customize and you can build your own trackers on. I just saw a message that you don't see my screen, so I will reshare the screen just in case. Can people see my screen?
Let's go.
Okay,
I see it.
amazing. Perfect, thank you very much. Awesome. So as I mentioned, the concepts run across like any of these types of systems, but fundamentally what we do, obviously, as I mentioned, is completely focused on the built environment and the construction industry, which is why we provide things like the templates that I mentioned. Now, in many ways, a lot of the process that Omar outlined for me sits within a wider suite of things that I need to create from an ISO 19650 perspective. Whether you look at information requirements or BIM execution plans, there is a common set of trackers that you'll usually have within these. So you will have things like, sorry, what I just want to do is I've set this as the home. You'll have things like project particulars. So what is my project? The scope that it has, the directory and the organizations that are involved and the individuals that are involved. Then there will be things around purposes of information that need to be captured somewhere. We have things like milestones, responsibility matrices, and a lot of what Omar was covering specifically relates to, in many ways, the detailed responsibility matrix. So what are the elements that I'm going to have, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be revisiting this shortly. We then have a range of information requirements. Omar focused today on the data requirements bit, really. So I have the specific object. I need to be able to specify what data that I need through it. There are geometrical requirements that I may need for each of these objects as well. And I may also need requirements related to document deliverables. That's a lot of what I covered in the last session, but we would take the document deliverables and then that ultimately would be linked to the master information delivery plan and the task information delivery plan, and then you can work from there. Now, really today's session is going to focus on two bits specifically within all of this. The first is going to be in the responsibility matrices and the detailed, or the systems, the assets and the systems, like responsibility matrix. And we're going to focus on information requirements that are the data requirement, specifically the model data requirements. Now, you can see throughout, I have this concept of documents. So we're looking at a document here, which is the equivalent of what we would have in a Word-based document. But then behind all of these, we have tables. So if I were to go into the alphanumeric requirements bit, you can see this is the table. If I wanted to make changes to this, I can. I think the key things to note are every one of these rows is, in many ways, it's a record, which means it's a unique value. So here I have my IFC entities. You can see I have the entity. I have a grouping next to it. I can have the property name. I can have a property description. What you can also see is there are a bunch of rules, so to speak, whether the value should exist, whether the value should be unique when they're entering it and when they were collecting the data, whether there's a regular expression to match all of this. So the information should look a specific way. A unit of measure, the data type. So is it a string? Is it a Boolean? And so on and so forth. Example values. And then we can add a few things like applicable stages and purposes and so on and so forth. Now, this table itself, the first key thing about it is every one of these columns has a specific data type. So you can see here, I have a data type, and we have 18 different data types within the system. A lot of these data types are common across databases. We may call them slightly different things, but fundamentally there will be a date field, there will be an attachment, there will be a select list, there will be URLs, there will be numbers, percentages, phones, select lists, which is the one we're looking at here. Tags is one that's unique to Morta. Text is just a text. URLs, where we can create links. Variables is something that's unique to Morta, and votes is unique to Morta. But you can see most of these are data types that you would find in any any one of these types of systems. Even if you look at things like SQL and Microsoft Access, these are the data types that you'll generally have. Now, what I can see here is my IFC entity table is column is a select list that has a source from another table, which is called elements, and we'll be going through that in a bit. There is a grouping one. There is a property name, and one of the things we see here is this is a text field, so I can input anything that I want. So I can change this to Torque, and I can change this to Torques. But later on, we'll be changing it so that it's a select list that comes out of building Smart Data Dictionary. The second, we then have properties. We have should exist, which is a checkbox data type. Whether it should be unique is a checkbox data type. So you can see here the type is checkbox. Irregular expressions are just open text, and unit of measure is could be a select list, and so can the data type. So the data type right now is text, but that means someone can come in and can input a second value and call this strings. And that causes me issues. So what I really want to do is I want everyone to always call this string. So what I can do is I can change this to a select list. And then I need to populate options. When I'm creating a select list, so select lists are very similar to pick lists that you would have in Excel, right? And in many ways, I can do one of two things. I can either set a source being another table. So like we saw earlier, the elements table was the source for the IFC entities bit. The second is I could just do it locally. So in this case, I don't want to create another table. I just want to have a unique set of values here. I'm just populating it with what I have in the table. And you can see integer has come out in two different ways. I have integer with capitals and integer without. So I'm going to delete the integer option that I had here. And I just want to look at anything that has an error value here. So I can use this concept of filters, and I can say I want to add it. I just want to only see the things that have errors within them and that are inconsistent with my reference set of values. So I've just changed this to integer. You could see initially I had the alert because it had the old value. But because now I've fixed that, the error message disappears. And now if I were to refresh the screen, I will see the full list again. So we can see here now we have the data types. We can see all of the data types are from the correct list of values that we had earlier. Now, what we then have are things like applicable stages and purposes. And those are multiple select values as they currently exist. And but they don't have a data source. So we can go through and we can set up a data source for this and start building a relationship between this table and the uses that we have. So if you recall earlier, when I went through this, I had a section around model uses and purposes. Let's find it. You can see here I have information, purposes, and objectives. You can see this is a reference list of values. Another set that I'm going to need in a second is going to be my milestones. So these are the milestones that I have. Because one of the things that Omar said was there are things that get populated in phases, and that ultimately relates to partly to where I am within the project. If I'm in my early design phases, I may not need the same information that I would need when I'm in a technical design phase, and then I would need more information related to handover, for example, in my manufacturing and construction stage. So my data requirements change over time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the data source for applicable stages. And this is us starting to explore relationships, right? So we're seeing we have a table here that has a relationship to two other tables. One is the purposes. Oops, I did this for applicable stages, whereas I should have done it for what's it called? So actually, this should be my milestones table. And then I have this option to keep values up to date. And the reason I have this option is if I want, when I change a value there, I want it to directly propagate and change here. So now you see I have my applicable stages and I can tag each of these with an applicable stage. When it comes to purposes, I'm going to do the same thing. But this time I'm going to get the right column and the right table. And then you can see here now, I can pick purposes against each of these different data requirements. So really, like, why are we doing these select lists? I think is a generally important question, right? It comes down to making sure that people are feeding in consistent data, right? So we have this a lot. People are filling in data. Different people may call a string different things, or they may misspell it. They may add spaces. They may make all of these like small tweaks, but then that makes it very hard to analyze where things are at, and it then means that the same reference values are being duplicated. That heavily relates to a lot of what Omar was speaking about earlier, because fundamentally what you would have within Revit or within any of the software is, in many ways, people start creating their own parameters, even though the parameters already exist and have been described elsewhere. So when we're planning out the needs, it's important to ensure that we're collecting data from a set of values that have already predefined, because then there is more control and more consistency in what's being defined. And that's where select lists really come in, because I now have a set of purposes that I've described in another table called purposes. If I make any changes here, that reflects down in the table that's using that select list. But it also ensures that we'll always have design authoring as a single use case rather than having many different things that all mean design authoring, for example. And that's how you start driving consistency in the data that's being collected on the platform. I'm seeing Shaima's comments, like 100% on I think it's this balance between being able to customize a process and build the type of process that you want and that's fit for you, while also ensuring that you have that flexibility, but the end users, you're guiding them towards things that are more consistent, which then helps you get the results that you need. Now, to continue with data types, here we can see that this is a URL, right? And what that means is we're checking is that people have to input something that is a URL. And if I input something, there is a link back to the data source and the link that comes through. Amazing. So to recap, what I wanted to do first is I see Omar wants to add something. So I'm just going to recap this and then I'll take Omar's point. I just wanted to recap this key concept of tables, which is I have a row, I have a record. Usually it should be unique, ideally in a database. I can then define data types for every one of my columns. We've seen things like select lists. We've seen checkboxes. We've seen URLs. We've seen multiple select lists. And ultimately, the select list can point to either localized lists or other reference values that exist within the tables. And that's an example of us starting to build relationships within the tables. There is this concept of foreign keys and primary keys within databases. In many ways, I am going back to a foreign key to that table, which has a specific key. And I'm saying there's a relationship from this table to that. That's really all I'm doing. Yeah, Omar, I think you wanted to say something.
I just want to say that what we see here with what's one of the most important thing when implementing data is to try to control and sort in some sort what are the information they needed, how they wrote it, like convention naming, or for example for the data type to avoid any disturbance between any requirement for each involved parties. So how we wrote, for example, data type as a real with a capital case in the first. So what we see now in different dimension of the beam, where especially when the SCADA and the BMS get involved, we need to really have control how data is written and where they need to be implemented. Because if we don't do that, I think one of the most inconvenient thing will happen. People will say, Beam, it's okay. It gives us a lot of opportunity, but mastering and monitoring this data, it's more problematic than the usual way. And we won't fall down in this kind of discussion because everyone knows the power of the Beam and the power of how we can sort data. So I really like what I am seeing now, because the interface is really easy to manage, even the links between all the documents, because I show one document, but there is, in my case, I think between 10 or 15 Excel other elements and Word, and everything is connected. But what we see here is we can gather the information in one section and reuse it in this data requirement without breaking the links. What would happen usually in Excel, usually when I'm sharing files, the request link are broken, and what we see here, it's really amazing. That's what I want to say.
Thank you very much. I think that it's very interesting, because what ends up happening is you're reproducing the same information in different places because you need it in different ways, and then the fact that it's then all happening in Excel ends up making it more of a challenge. I picked up on something you said there that I found interesting, and it goes back to what I think you've done is very scalable, because you've just gone, I have model data planning, I need to map this to IFC, and I need to map it to Revit and maybe translations, but I also over time may need to map it to various BMS systems, and then that's a whole other set of classifications, like almost, that we can start, which is really, really cool. And that like that it gets very, very hard aligning all of these things together. But that's why we need more robust ways of doing it so that there is more control. So yeah, no, really thanks for that comment.
Actually, one other thing, when you are using software like Aconex or Oracle, where the requirement and the information, how they be structured, can change a little bit from one software to another software, can be challenging. So we need always some database to manage all the information. And usually we don't have one project, we have several projects in several regions. So we need to have always something to, like a version, what we need to do and where needed to be done and where we are going from one project to another project, and the aspect differs from country to another country. So that's why.
Yeah, no, amazing. Yeah, I think it's the beginning. Like I think first covers a lot of the challenges that everyone has, but I think and that's where I really think information management is at the beginning of, we haven't actually scratched the surface of where we need to go because there are all of these, I don't want to go on a massive tangent, but data needs, generally speaking, so far has, I would argue, been limited to handover needs and design authoring needs. But we haven't actually explored data requirements in its fullest sense. Like a very simple example is even this table where we're specifying information requirements, that should be a set of data requirements for information requirements. And then I have documents. What metadata do I want around my documents? That's another set of data requirements in many ways. Like this is the data that I'm looking for in relation to a document object. And then that needs to be mapped, or because Aconex calls it something, Procore calls it something, ACC calls it another. And there is this mapping between data that I need from standardized schemas, and there is what are my suppliers of the data. And within that, we have for different things, different suppliers. So we'll have things like the model data, which we're really looking at now. All of that is supplied from model authoring software. But we could have data related to smart buildings, which come out of VMS systems. And we have data related to documents and what's been uploaded, which comes out of the common data environments and document management systems. We have financial data from ERPs, and it goes on. And I really think we're still at the beginnings of the world is about information management is about a lot more beyond model authoring and BIM as we see it today.
But I think it's the foundation, what we see here. If you want to talk about data governance to ensure quality assurance and all the information, this must be done. And in the early stage, it will be better. Not doing that during the project. So for now, for asset information requirement, or from the point of view of an owner before starting a project, this part, besides finance and everything, must be done in a good way and streamless way to be able to share it, and then everything will go smooth and correct.
Yeah. No, amazing. Thanks a lot for sharing. What I'll do is we've covered so far, we've covered this is the list of data that I require, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to make sure that my property names are coming out of Building Smart Data Dictionary. So I don't know if you've come across BSDD, but effectively it's a data dictionary that has a list of the different properties that I need within IFC that's already been created in by Building Smart. So just to
Actually, I have one question for that.
Yeah, go for it.
For the BSDD, Does it took in account what kind of IFC we are talking about? If it is an IFC 2.0 or
Yeah,
4.3, because
it
sometimes the classification will change and there is always an update from version to version.
yeah. So generally speaking, it's meant to be both IFC, but it's we've seen that the data is much better for 4.3. 2 times 3, it's missing a lot of things. So we're pulling out in this case relate things related to 4.3, but it should in theory have both. That's I'm I haven't found good ones for 2.3.
You
2
should
times
be
3,
able
sorry.
to manage because maybe in few years or next year we're gonna have one AFC 5 or AFC 6.
Yeah, so
So
I think it will be better for the future ones. I imagine it will be fine. It's historic that I think seems to be the problem. So I'm hoping that this will only get better in time. But what we have done, to be honest, is we've also scraped on our end. We've scraped 2 times 3, but via API we're getting 4.3 from them. But we're also getting things like ETEM, Uniclass, and a few other data dictionaries. Now, what what I have here is I'm looking for 4.2. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to create. I need these from my templates. So I haven't put it in the templates yet, but we'll put it into the templates together. So generally speaking, we have these templates, obviously, that I mentioned. Within them, we have the reference data values. So here, I'm just going to set this as a template. And I'm just going to create this from a template. And I'm going to use this. So you could see there how I manage templates. I just went in and I created my own template. What organizations that are using us are doing is they're templating these processes. And for there's like a range of template management features and like the ability to have reference data sets that propagate across projects. But I'm loading in now the IFC bit, reference data. It'll take a minute. I usually get an email when that happens. I'm just checking if I've received that. One second, sorry. Okay. While that happens, because it's like a 250,000 row table. I think can take a bit longer to like actually duplicate. What I want to do now is I want to systemize this a bit more. There are a few challenges that I have here. First, you can see we have a listing of all of these IFC entities. Not all of these may apply for my project. The second thing is every one of these IFC entities belongs to a discipline. And what I really want is for someone from a specific discipline to only see things for that discipline. And I want to be able to filter this table to focus on disciplines. Right now, I can filter on actuator, and I can see everything related to actuator, which was one of the Excel files that Omar shared earlier. But I may also want to see it by discipline. I may want to see it by property as well. So I could come in, for example, and group this so that it's by property. And we can see acoustic rating is used in all of these different entities. But what I really want to be able to do now is I want to be able to go, what does a specific discipline, what can they see? And I have two choices. Like one choice is I can come and I can enter my disciplines here. But what I also have is a list of disciplines in my elements table. So in my elements, I have a discipline column. And what I want to do now is I want to be able to derive my discipline from this table. So I already have this table that has the list of my unique elements. It then has the discipline. It has the Revit mapping, and so on and so forth. There's something I would, but I also within this, I have what's applicable and what isn't applicable. So I can come in and I can say, these are the specific elements that apply for my project. So what I ideally want to do is, as I'm mapping out this process, and I'm going in here and I'm defining my responsibilities, if I've defined that this specifically applies, I want the data requirements for that to show up here. And if it doesn't apply, I don't want it to show up. Now, to do that, what I can do is I can go to this table and I can establish a relationship. So we've seen one relationship where I'm referencing data in this, and I have a select list that reads from another data source. What I now want to do is use this concept of lookups. So a lookup allows me to look up data from another table into this table so that I don't have to enter the information multiple times. Omar earlier mentioned VLOOKUPs because that's something that we have within Excel. If you've used databases, they're called joins. We initially called them joins, but we call them lookups because that's much closer to what we have within Excel. So what I want to do here is I want to build a relationship between those two. And I want to do this based on my entity. And I want this to be based on IFC entity. Let's see what happens. What I then want to do is I want to pull out whether it's applicable, and I want to pull out the discipline. I'm just checking why isn't sorry. This should have been, I was like, something is wrong. I meant to look up against the elements table. And I'm going to go through IFC entity. Yeah, this word, this now makes a lot more sense. And I want to pick through what is applicable. And I want to get the discipline. So all I'm doing is I'm looking up from that elements table we were looking at. Initially, accidentally, I was looking into the reference table for that. I then define my mapping condition. So I want to look it up when both the IFC entities match up, and I want to bring in the discipline and whether it's applicable into this. And okay, amazing. So you can see we've now looked up the disciplines. If I group this information, and I group this. And what do I want to do next? I want this. So what's happening here is we have some entities that belong to two disciplines, for example. So for one reason or the other, what I've done is I've clicked on unpack as an option. And I'm going to save this as a new view. And I will explain what a view is now. Oh, sorry, I need to click OK. So effectively, we have the table, right? I'm going to call this by discipline, just so that I have it. We have the table. The table comes in a very specific format. The raw format has this data like this. What you often see in Excel, though, is you'll merge cells because you want to make it look like things belong to a discipline. And in many ways, that becomes a view of the data. You may want to see a chart. Again, that's a view of the data. What we also saw with Omar earlier was there were different Excel files that all had the same information, but their target or their level of aggregation was different. So what would happen now is all of that has to be managed. But on a database, you can have the table itself, and then you can create configurations or views of that table. So you can see by default, for any of these tables, I can do things like add filters. I can hide a column that I may not need. I can filter by a discipline. I can group by discipline, and so on and so forth. And really what we're doing here is, what we've done here is we've done exactly that. So we've just grouped by a specific discipline. We say that we don't want the entities, for example, and we don't want to have the groupings. And I want this to be my view by discipline, which is a much more human readable view that I can come in and I can see things with. So someone like Omar, for example, wants to see all of the disciplines and everything that they all belong to. So he can then very easily drill down on each of these as would be needed. The second thing is I then need the specific supply chain member to be able to see all the information that's relevant for them. So they don't even want to see anything that doesn't belong to mechanical engineering or structural engineering. But they also shouldn't see what doesn't apply in the context of the project. So first, what I'm going to do is I can add another condition to my view where I say I want it to be only the things that are applicable. And apparently nothing is applicable. We'll double check that in a second. But let's go and see the values. Oh, I have a feeling I know it works. So I'm going to put these as applicable. Let us see what is going on here.
Actually, this is important because for me, I think one of the most important things in this process is to be able to share the information the easy way for all the chain value of the people. So that's really interesting how you can customize the same tab without moving to other files or other tabs by preparing other templates.
Yeah. I have a feeling there is a bug. So the beauty of me having to do the slide is I have to figure out how I'm going to work with the bug to make it work in front of you. So let us let me see. But I think like to the point that Omar, you were just making, I think that is one of the most important, like how do we make it all more accessible for people is one of the things that's very, very important. But also how do you systemize it down the line so people can just go in and pick what applies for them and what doesn't. Okay, I'm just hacking something here. True. Yeah, okay, this worked. I'm not sure why it's bugging out with the select value, but I just created a mirror copy of that column, and that's a live copy using formulas, but that's me hacking and making it work. Okay, amazing. So now what happens is I have these entities that I've defined that I want. Sorry, I was going through the chat for a second. Really sorry, just got disoriented. 1 second. Okay, effectively, I was looking through the chat and I saw that there's a question by Mohammed around lock access to specific disciplines and BIM coordinators to make sure that only they can edit the parameters they are concerned with. And I'm really glad you asked that because that's exactly what I'm about to show next. Because one view should be the aggregated view, but I should have another view that focuses on the specific discipline. Now that we've made applicability work, what I want to do next is I want to do a filtered version of this that's only for architecture. And I'm just going to remove this for a second. Let's see why this is happening in a second. I know why it's happening. What's this?
I think dealing with the issue in life is really important because everyone will have the same issue sometimes. So to figure out how to deal with it, it's a good process.
Yeah, but also I think there's two sides to this, right? There's the side of I'm building something and I'm really trying to take a process to the next level, and here I'm doing that. But there's also the basic things which I can just do and get up and running with. Building is obviously like a bigger skill set. So what's happening here is I'm actually not sure why this is happening. I'll be taking a look at this afterwards. But fundamentally, I think what all that's happening is I have something that belongs to two disciplines, so it will still show up as like in both. But if I, like for some reason I put column under both of them. But effectively, what happens is I have my specific discipline here. Sorry, let me just actually look into something. I'm really sorry. I have a single discipline. It's in the mappings. Okay. It'll probably be in the mappings. So there are some things that belong to, if I take my column, let's discover this. Here it is. Sorry. Okay. I've been disoriented trying to figure out why one of them is. Let me explain what has been going on in my mind. Which I think the interesting thing is these relationships things like highlight this. Effectively, we have a column I've been trying to filter on it so that it only has architecture. But we see architectural and structural engineering are popping up in this case. And I was trying to understand, I've just filtered on architecture. Why is the structural engineering value coming? And the reason for that is if we go back to the elements table, the requirements table that I've made is defined based on IFC solely. So what I'm doing is I'm building a relationship between the requirements for IFC and this table. But I have IFC column twice here, once under the architecture discipline and once under the structural engineering discipline, which then means that even though it's I'm looking purely at the requirements for architectural, one of them belongs to both, and that's why that's appearing. I hope that makes sense in terms of why it's actually like why it appears under both. Now, what I can do now is I've saved this so that it's purely looking at someone who's in the architectural discipline. What I can then do is the challenge that I'm going to have now is I have one which is by the architectural discipline, one which is electrical engineering, one that's mechanical engineering, and one that's structural engineering. I have two choices. I could either do several static filters, so like I did here, do another one that's by architecture and call this is for the architect. And then I can come in here and under data requirements, I can add a new subsection and I can call it architect view. And here I can see purely by the architect's view. And this is what they would see. So they only have the information requirements that belong to them. But then I would need to set up many of these. And in many of, especially in like much larger projects, there are then like tens of disciplines involved. And that then means you're administering every single one of these. So another approach that we've developed is this concept of filtering by tag. So if I go back to my element to my information requirements table, sorry, you could see here I did it by architect, but what I could do instead is I can call this dynamic. I can filter on one of, and I can do tag values. And what a tag value is what I've defined within the platform here. So I can come in, you can see I have I belong to a specific discipline. This is not going to work, and I know why. But okay, we're going to change something. So for context, templates were being refined yesterday, and I think I made some things that there are some things that are yet to be cleaned. So here, let's hope this works. Yeah, I will not be able to change this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add this as a tag. Only one tag column is allowed per table. How do I do this quickly? Okay, I'm just gonna discipline 2. Add 10 rows. So I can set up a tag, and a tag is basically anything that I want within my project. So it could be my disciplines, it could be my company, so my originator, it could be my contract number. so on and so forth. So I've just set this up as a tag. And I just called the discipline 2 for the sake of example for now. And architecture. I don't want civil. Now, if I go back to that dynamic view, what I'll see is this view will be filtered based on me being an architect. And it won't show me anything. It will only show me structural engineering because of what we discussed earlier. But if I now go and I ignore this is the wrong one. If I change this to civil engineering, I will now see something else. So you can see, I can see less. Oh no, sorry, it's here. This should be dynamic view. I can't see anything because I'm guessing nothing has been ticked there. And let's double check. Yeah, see, there is no civil. Then that's why it picked up nothing. Now, if we go and change it back to mechanical engineering, for example, you can see here, I now have in my dynamic view, I have the data requirements for mechanical engineering, not the others. So fundamentally what happens is you set up a dynamic filter, and then based on who I am as a user, the user then only sees information that's relevant to them, so they don't have to deal with everything. And then if they want to edit things, they can only edit their own things. Now, I'm just going to quickly recap some of the things that we touched on because I want to touch on one more topic that's important. But just to quickly recap, like what are some of the things that we touched on and how do they relate to what we saw from Omar earlier? The first thing is we saw that there is a detailed data requirements table that can be created. Now, this data requirements table is in many ways what Omar had in different views. So there was a master view, but then he also had another Excel workbook that just showed things specific to a discipline or specific to the IFC entities that are involved. And then in some cases, he even grouped by property, for example. And you can see how using this concept of views, you can do a range of that. We also had a lot of classifications and mappings. And the way to do the equivalent of a classification or mapping in a database is in these lookups that we just went through earlier. So you could see how I could retrieve into this table, based on my actuator name, I could retrieve the discipline that it belongs to and whether it's applicable. But I can use the same concept to pull out the mappings that I would have to Revit. I could use it to pull out the translations. I could use it to any of these other tables that I've built with that information. I can also use the concept of views to filter on what's applicable and what isn't, and so on and so forth. Now, the last thing that I want to touch on is Omar had quite a few macros. One macro was to create the IFC shared parameters. Another was to create, and then the second was for Revit and Revit data mapping. And then the third could be something like IDS. So within any of these systems, you usually have is this concept of APIs. So a system like Morta has APIs, and on the APIs, you can then build your own custom tools that you can then run and you can trigger when you want to trigger them. But you can extend the concept further using something called webhooks. And a webhook is in many ways something that executes an automation service, or think of it as the equivalent of a macro but written in Python, for example, that then does a specific sequence of steps. So what I want to do today is I just want to demonstrate how I would go about turning the data requirements table that we have here and that we've built in our templates as Morta aligns with IDS. So what I can do is I can directly change this to become an IDS file. And how I do that is we've developed this service that you can just hook into. So I can go in here and I can go to this concept of webhooks, and I can add the endpoint, the service that I want to do. I can add the second one here called IDS generation. I can give it a description. I don't think I have any custom headers. What I want next is I want submitted, and I want it to be for this document. And of course, it's this. I've created a webhook. So all a webhook is think of it as an add-on. It's a script that runs and does something very specific, and it's triggered by an event on the platform. So you could see when I'm doing things, when someone opens a document, or when someone creates a table, or when they add in a new row, I can trigger this automation service. In this case, what I've done is I've done it so that it's based on a process submission or a document submission, sorry. So if I go in here and I turn my data requirements into a section that someone can respond to, I can come in here and I will trigger that service that creates my IDS for me. So I can now come and I can click submit response. And then once I click submit response, what it does, it will run that cloud-based service that I have. And I will get an email in a second. I'll just give it 1 minute. I'm just going to open one that I received earlier very quickly. So you can see I would generate an IDS file. When I've generated that IDS file, that could be received in the system, but for the time being, I just did it like we just set it up so that it's by email. But I can then see I have this IDS file. I can open it with a notepad, and then you can see here, this is my IDS file that I can then take into something like Celebri or anything else. Now, the equivalent of that would be any of these other XML exports, for example, can be created just like we did the IDS file, for example. And you can see how the system in many ways it's something that looks like an Excel file that's somewhere between Excel and Word. It's a dynamic web-based hub. There is a lot more robustness in the way that the data is collected, but that can be configured and that can be changed. I can build relationships between different data sets. And again, that's a very key concept in something in databases. But then I can extend it with additional services that I can build on top of it using, and that I can trigger using concepts of APIs and webhooks, which then allows me to take the system to the next level. So I hope you could see how or where databases come in to building something like this, and then how it can systemize the process further. Obviously, it doesn't take me this long to build these things, but what I am trying to do in the session is explain the key concepts, like how do I use relationships, how do I use select lists, how do I look up to different values, and why do I need to do these lookups, and just show you how it all comes together and the concepts in order to get to a solution. Starting with the templates that we have to take it towards something like what Omar was showing us earlier. I'm just curious, Omar, what are your thoughts like based on this?
Very fun, really interesting. And one of the parts is having everything on the same centralized platform It's a good improvement for this process. And one thing with automation I see just now, for me, I try to figure out when we can also add revision of this element data requirement from the different appointed parties. Because sometimes with my process, one of the cons of my process that only be it had to be managed by the bin manager of the owner each time to implement a new parameter. They have to go through the bin manager because only one person can manage it. But with this system, we can work in collaboration and do via a revision system that each discipline can add this one. I needed this one. I can implement and add. So basically sharing the information by discipline or by I would say leading appointed parties could be interesting, and
Yeah,
having everything connected, especially when I'm try to remember with the last session with Ralph, with implementing the information from disciplines and all the data, everything got connected and sorted in easy way. So I find it amazing, especially big. I would say one of the best things about this kind of session is to see when you have issues, how to deal with issues with softwares. Because usually when we are presenting softwares, we don't. It's a good path. We don't see how we deal with issues, but seeing the issues in life, how to figure out how to deal with that, how to sort them, how to explain the process easier for everyone. I am really hoping to push this to the next level or the next months and explore what you can do
thank you
further.
so much. It's really good to get the feedback, to be honest, on the like issues and how, because I'm like obviously really appreciate your feedback there, but also to anyone who's watching, like we're like it's intentional that it's not scripted. Like I don't like, and you could see from things that happen. It's for me, it's just another another one of the calls that I have with someone who knows the process and challenging me, generally speaking, can you do this or can you do that? I'm trying to keep, like, I'd like the sessions to stay like that. But the only thing I try to add that I don't do to this extent, obviously, and in most schools, is I don't explain the concepts as I'm doing like all of it, like this deeply, because I'm trying to make it more educational, rather than me selling a system, like per se. Um, so if you feel like that gets messy at points and you think it should be more structured, just give me that feedback. But yeah, I personally think that too many things are way too scripted, and I'm just trying to show it, to be honest, as it is. So I really appreciated Omar's feedback there. One thing that I wanted to just touch on and what you said, because also I think Al Shaima was talking about revision control. Now, obviously, you can do a range of things. You can you can create exports for these, which are almost the traditional way of revisioning. I can create an export and I have a version of what that looks like at the point in time. I can do that by downloading this as an Excel file, for example, and then I can version it and so on and so forth. Another thing that I can do is I have audit trails within the system. So every single thing that I was doing is logged on the platform. And you can see here, I have every single time I opened a view, every single cell update I made, every single thing that I do on the platform is logged. But these logs are then made accessible via API, and we can use them in different ways. So one use case, and this will be the first time that I try to do this, but I know that got implemented earlier this week. One thing that we often see in Excel files is a column that says previous value and a column that says the new value, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a column here and I'm going to call it previous value. And there's a lot of admin that has to be done in these Excel files in order to do that, usually. what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this as text, and I'm going to use a formula, and I believe it's this. Yeah, it is for this value, and I believe it is this field that I'm looking for. It's a bit trippy that it's both values, but oh no, it's because it's a property name. Sorry, that makes it make more sense. I've changed this to property name. Now, let's see what happens if I so you can see it's automatically logging the last. I've never tried this feature. It literally got implemented a day or 2 days ago, but I was excited about it, but I didn't get the chance over the last day. So you can see here, I can put in this value, and then this is automatically logged in the second column. So if I now add in stroke becomes strokes, it's still stroke. If I now move it to strokes with 2 S's, it changes to S. So this is always logging the last value, and you don't need to do that manually anymore, which is also really relevant from change management and revision control perspective, because right now what happens in projects is people are reliant on someone telling them that they made a change on a cell level, or they're asking them to fill in your old value and your new value. But because it's in a database and all of these audit rails are captured, we were already capturing them. Now we're starting to surface them within the tables in order for us to show how we can automate some of these things that people have to do within these Excel files, like literally just relogging what is a previous value. So just felt like trying it out on the spot when you said that, Omar.
Yes. When I'm seeing that, I start to thinking and figure out what can be done since we moved to this kind of platform, because since we are dealing with some issues, I would not say we have issue with Excel. It's one of the best softwares we can work on, but we can pass through some things. We can figure out and think about new stuff to implement with this kind of procedure.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely agree with it's one of the best. Like, I mean, the flexibility of Excel has allowed a lot of applications to be built on top of Excel. Like, that's the magic of Excel, in my opinion. Um, I often see like companies that will focus on getting people out of Excel and Word, but what they're showing is one application of Excel. But the beauty of Excel to me is you could build the kind of process that you built on Excel, and you can build your own solutions to respond to problems that you think is important are important. So it lends its room to people being creative and people solving problems and making their own tools. And that in many ways, obviously, that's one of the key principles we're trying to keep in everything we do. We think Excel is good because of that level of flexibility, but if I'm going to be collaborating with people, if I want something that's cloud-based, if I want something that connects to other things and that's more robust, like that's the kind of thing that us and like a lot of these no-code solutions are trying to tackle, but maintain that same level of flexibility that Excel has, which is I think its most beautiful feature, to be honest, or it's the reason why Excel is so dominant, to be honest.
So for the first steps, it would be for me. It was easy to do it in Excel because of all the formula, the data query, the Power Query, and all what I have. But if you want to move to the next level and working on the same database, this solution as Morta can work better for me from the point of view of the BIM to share the information, to gather all the information, especially for the automatization, use it. and going, because for now, what we see in your table content, I would say, in Morta, I have the mirror of it in different file. So I have my BEP, pre-BEP, post-BEP. Then we go to the model development specification, information exchange requirements, and so on and so on, and try to connect all the elements between them. And from each project, I have to take all the database, move it to another file, reset it, and try to customize it to the requirement of the client or the standards of this country. So this new approach can be really interesting now for people using Excel in the first, then moving to implement it with Morta could be a good process to share the information, to monitor it, even if you add the revision of these things. So each file, it has been done automatically, we'll submit for the right person, and each person can do his comment and change it, and all the revision process can be added. So it will open new things. Even as I see now, Morta is connected to ACC, so trying to extract the information from Revit and summarize it with the Morta too. So for me, the best thing is try to connect all these kind of softwares and relying sometime in Morta and relying sometime on other softwares, but try to have a central database to monitor everything.
Yeah. No, amazing. To be honest, that's exactly what I think like that's the key thing. So I really appreciate you picking up on that. The key thing is I think that in many ways, again, that's what we do on Excel. We bring information together. And it's the only place we can produce some information, but it's very, very difficult to manage, and it's very difficult to coordinate. So really, we're just trying to simplify it. And I think what is really interesting is the amount of data that's duplicated across files is insane. If you look within a single discipline, just like BIM documents, so many things get repeated, like the disciplines, the milestones, the stakeholders. And that's where reusing it.
Sorry to interrupt. I show you once what I had to do to secure the link between files, because even we are working in SharePoint on the same file, the link between files when we are using Power Query it has to break, because the link have my laptop name in front of the SharePoint links. So usually we try to find other solution by using hard links and other tabs, like I show you in my presentation before.
Yeah.
To ensure that the link at each time when I'm working on my database and updating the information, people who is connected with me on the same SharePoint or OneDrive had to be able to do the refresh of the request. Otherwise, it will be problematic. Cannot rely on sharing this file or always sharing the database file. So for me as a BIM manager, I think everyone should use all these platforms and try to figure out how to connect them in a better way.
Yeah, 100%. No, amazing. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Omar, for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your learnings with us and your experience with us. I really appreciate it from my end. And thanks everyone for joining us today. As I said, I'm really hoping you're seeing value from these sessions. Believe it or not, I'm not trying for them to be like purely sales-oriented sessions. I'm hoping that there is something educational in all of it, and just opening your eyes to what the world looks different, how the world looks different if you were to use systems like this. But yeah, obviously we'd love to work with you. So if there is any feedback on how we can make these sessions more useful, just please let me know. The next one is likely to be focused on COBie data and COBie data assurance. And it will follow on nicely from what we did today, because it will focus on taking this data requirements table and using it to specify the requirements and then collect the data and assure it against the data requirements that we covered today. So yeah, thank you all for joining today. Any feedback would love to get it. And thank you so much, Omar, for joining us today. And thank you to BIM Coordinator Summit for organizing and for Amos specifically. Cool.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a really good day, everyone.
You too, and everyone too.